My goal as a field training officer was to figure out what type of style, what type of personality my trainee had, and then maximize whatever it is and make them the best at that. But also give them other traits to maybe do it better. So I would always tell people, look, I don't want you to be like me. I want you to be you. The moment you start trying to be somebody you're not, people will pick up on that. Use of force for me is one of those things that I think is so important to educate people on what the use of force continuum is, when we use force, why we use force, how we use force. So that way, the next time you see that viral video, you can take a step back, you take a breather and say, there might be some other facts before I make a prejudgment call on that. We're so much easier and lenient on other professions. We have so much grace for other professions. But law enforcement is one of those professions where we don't get much grace. Like you make a mistake, there's no compassion or nothing. And again, law enforcement is kind of complicit in this. We've never really developed relationships with some of the members of our community. So I think we're going in the right direction, and I think we're trending right. I think law enforcement has figured it out. But that's why I like podcasts like this. That's why my organization exists, so that way we can also get community members up to speed. Like, why would you not want to invest into your public safety? Why? We live in the greatest country in the world, the United States of America, and we have ancestors that fought tooth and nail so that way I can live in the freedoms that we have today. So I want to cast my bucket right where I'm at, and that's what I want Breaking Barriers United to be, and that's where I want our community and society to go as a whole, is stop letting the man or the politicians, these people, hold you or tell you what you should be. You go out there and be the person that you were designed to be.
You're listening to the ATO Bridging the Divide podcast, brought to you by the Assist the Officer Foundation.
Since 1999, the ATO has given assistance to the first responder community, and now we want to give them a platform to hear their incredible stories.
We also want to hear the stories of the many people that support us.
Our community is small, but it is strong.
We have differences. We don't always agree, and we all make mistakes.
But together we can grow, we can heal.
And we can learn from those mistakes.
And together we can bridge the divide.
This country has a long history of breaking barriers. We're actually known for it, as our history, although brief in comparison to other countries, has a foundation of going against the norms, having liberties and freedoms and opportunities only others can dream of. But with all the progress we've made, all the changes that have occurred, we know we still have several miles to go to get better. When it comes to figures and traits and qualities to break barriers, some come to mind. Innovators, catalysts, advocates. Our history has many of these. So many groups needed voices, and so many need to be heard, because no matter what race, no matter what sex, what profession, no matter what life experiences, we all have to listen and learn from one another, and we have to coexist in the world. Today's guest understands this all too well. His life journey has been ever evolving, and his thirst for knowledge and understanding of people have come to define him and his mission. Growing up in Rialto, California, he had interactions with police. Sadly, these were negative, and it caused him to despise the profession and what the badge stood for. But he wanted to serve. He wanted to do more. He wanted to make change. He wanted to contribute to this life as long as he was going to be a part of it. So he prayed, and he chose to serve and was hired on by the Chino Police Department. But he wanted to do more. He wanted to make more of a difference in bridging gaps with the police and community they served. And after a conversation with his mother, he understood what his new mission and his path must be. I read something recently that reminded me of why I started this podcast, but it also made me think of today's guest and his incredible story. What's the difference between people who see and seek gaps and those that see and seek bridges? The first stops and stays on the side, The second crosses and reaches new worlds. As soon as your mind identifies the bridge, the gap is gone. But the bridge was always there. You just had to see it. There are holes in the ground, yet a bridge, which is there, but may take time to see. Filled it. That's where asking better questions come in. Where is the bridge so I can cross? There is one. Believing there is a bridge from where you are to where you want to go is 99% of the battle. The other 1% is to cross it. But do I have to build the bridge? Maybe. But everything is first created in the mind and then in the world. The bridge is there. See it. Cross it. Richie Norton. Welcome back, ATO family. I'm here with the great Sergeant Kent Wolverton. Sasha Kim is sitting in the room. She won't get behind the mic, but we'll see if we can change her mind. It's our honor to welcome on the great Ryan Tillman, Breaking Barriers United. Ryan, thanks for being on.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it, man. I don't know about great, but I'm here.
Well, I think the listeners, after they hear this episode, I think they'll see what I'm talking about.
Well, man, it's a true honor to be here with you guys. I'm humbled at the opportunity. The moment you asked, I jumped at the opportunity just because, I mean, Dallas Police Department is the department.
Yeah, well, sometimes I think we get spoiled. We talk to so many people across the country, and we've been in this wellness unit now. We talk to a lot of surrounding agencies and even agencies outside the state that reach out to us for guidance on things. And I think we might be a little spoiled because we're so in the middle of it. Mm-hmm. But, it's nice to hear that somebody that police in California that thinks highly of Dallas PD.
I do. And I'm not just saying that, but it's funny. I spent a lot of time in Dallas over the last 3 years. And so I've gotten to know a lot of people from the Dallas Police Department, from the Dallas community. So I'm not just saying that when I say like you guys are that department. So.
And we have the great Dallas Cowboys and Dak Prescott, who's a big, he's a friend of the Dallas PD.
Oh man, yeah, he is, man. Yeah. Dak's such a good dude, and my heart still hurts for how the turnout. I guess it wasn't a part of the NFL script this year.
Yeah, definitely not scripted.
No, because I'm a lifelong Cowboy fan, and that hurt. That still hurts.
Yeah,
especially the lose of that team.
I know.
You ready to get into this?
Let's do it, man. Let's do it.
All right. I did a lot of cyber stalking you in preparation for this, but so I know the answer to the questions I'm asking, but I want the listeners to get to know you, starting out about how you grew up, where you grew up, and your perception of law enforcement early on.
Yeah, for sure. So I grew up in this city called Rialto, California. It's borders another city, San Bernardino. So if you're not familiar with that area, San Bernardino per capita is probably one of the most violent cities in the state of California, and it's up there in I think the top 5 in the nation. And so Rialto is on that border. Matter of fact, my high school technically is in the city of San Bernardino, but for whatever reason, when they did the zoning or whatever, they called it's part of Rialto Unified School District. But anyways, I bring it up because it kind of sheds a little bit of context into the type of way I was raised. So Fortunately, I had 2 amazing parents, 2 middle-class parents, did everything in their power to keep me out of trouble, which they did, to keep me on the straight and narrow, to give me good home values and stuff like that. But it didn't take away from the area that I lived in. So I lived in a decent area. However, the people that lived around me, the people that attended my school, a lot of these people were impoverished. A lot of these people didn't have dads in their lives. Most of my friends, matter of fact, didn't have dads in their lives. So I remember being in high school when I was a freshman. I'll never forget, we showed up to practice and there was a police car on the field. We were like, why is there a police car on the field? And 2 of the guys on our team were on probation. And so like that was the environment that I kind of lived in. But I had really, really good friends, a really good village to help raise me. That being said though, growing up in a predominantly, at the time, it was probably predominantly Hispanic and black neighborhood. Culturally, it wasn't keen of us to like law enforcement. And this is before some of my bad experiences with law enforcement. So it just wasn't keen, like, why like law enforcement? Like, I always, in my mind, thought cops were guys that got picked on in high school, so they became cops so they could pick on everybody else. So that was always a perception. But then as I got older and I started having my own personal encounters with law enforcement, it almost for me solidified my preconceived or my disposition of law enforcement. So one of the most vivid memories I had was I remember I had just got my license. I was in my little 94 Ford Mustang, all white, called it the White Knight. driving down Rialto Avenue, and I was talking on the phone. I had a beanie on my head, whatever, but like, you know, you're a young high school teenager, 18 years old, feeling yourself. And some guys in Unmarked rolled up next to me and just start cussing me out. Just tell me, get off the bleeping phone and wipe the bleeping smile off your face and all this other stuff. And in my mind, I'm just thinking like why? Like, you could have just easily told me to get off the phone, or you could have just pulled me over. I would have rather you just pulled me over without cussing me out. So that was one. And then I had another situation where I was driving through a nicer neighborhood. This was a couple years after that. And as I'm driving through a nicer, I was actually in a decent car. I had a G35 at the time, Infiniti G35 on chrome, 20
Nice.
grills, you know. So anyways, I'm driving through a nice neighborhood, and this guy's following me in like a personal car. And then he pulls up next to me. He's like, "What are you doing here?" I'm like, "Oh, I'm just looking at the homes." And I was actually on my lunch break from work. He was like, "Oh, you need to leave the neighborhood." I'm like, "Why?" I was like, "Why?" He was like, "Oh, well, you're suspicious, and if you don't leave the neighborhood, I'll call my partners. I work for the county, the sheriff's department, and I'll call some of my partners and have them escort you off the property." I'm like, in my mind, I'm thinking like, you don't even know who I am. So I had a few of these situations. Some of my family members had situations like this. And so that was just making me think like, I can't stand cops. Like, cops just think they're better than everybody. They have this chip on their shoulder and all this other stuff. And so that was kind of like my notion or my disposition of law enforcement as I grew up.
They're the rule. They're providing the rules, and they're going to be hard on you, and they're going to put you in an environment to, you know, they're going to keep a thumb on you, and that validated your feelings of
100%, 100%. Because I mean, if we talk about good policing, I didn't really know what good policing looked like. I didn't even know what that was. I didn't even know what the image of that was. So if this is all I had to pull from, my whole disposition was like, man, screw the cops.
Why did you decide to get into law enforcement?
The short answer is God.
Okay.
But the longer answer is this.
We got time. Don't worry.
Yeah, so I went to college. So after finishing high school, I had the opportunity to go walk on to the University of Nevada, Las Vegas in football. So I walked on my first year. We were actually really, really good in – so my high school team, we had about 9 athletes go Division I, play Division I college football, but we didn't win a game our senior year. We won 2 games our senior year. My junior year, we lost every single game. We had 5 different head coaches in 4 years. So, like, we never had a really good system, but we had all the athletes. And so I didn't get the scholarship that I wanted, so I had the opportunity to walk on at UNLV. Went there, did well. I graduated with my degree in marketing and business. So in my mind, I'm going to graduate. I'm going to go start this Fortune 500 company. I'm going to go off into the sunset, have a stay-at-home wife, drive an Aston Martin for a car, and that was it, you know. And so when I graduated and that didn't happen like I thought it was going to happen, I started looking for jobs. And so I had met my wife my senior year of college, and she was working for a local grocery store chain at home. And I'll never forget, man, like I was working, selling insurance for Primerica, you know, doing that, trying to get my hustle on, overcoming objections, the whole 9 yards. Then I was working at Abercrombie & Fitch as an assistant manager. And I hated that store, man. I probably got cancer from all the freaking cologne that we sprayed in that store all the time. And so I was just thinking like, man, this sucks. Like, so my wife one morning, I hear her crying in the bathroom. And I'm thinking like, I immediately, as soon as I heard her cry, I already knew what was going on. Because she already told me, she said, if you get me pregnant, like I'm going to cry because like we are not ready for a baby. So my wife is crying in the bathroom. I'm like, oh, well, I guess she's pregnant. And so that's when his switch just went off, and I was like, man, like I got to do something to provide. Like I can't just be like doing these odd jobs here and there. She was actually the breadwinner at the time. So I prayed about it. At the time, my dad's friend was a captain at one of our local police departments, Ontario Police Department. He was like, Ryan, you should be a cop. And I was like, absolutely not. Like, I'm not working for the man. I'm not about to be a pig. I'm not like, this is just not like at the time, that was my mentality. Mm-hmm. So he was like trying consistently for like 2 years trying to get me to become an officer. So much so, like, he would schedule times for me to go link up with my dad. So my dad would invite me out to lunch with him and his friends. And at the time, my dad was struggling with MS. And so I would take my dad to go meet up with his friends. And so one time we went to this restaurant and we met up with his friend Dexter, who was the captain. And Dexter is a black guy. And that's important for where I'm going with the story. So Dexter's a black guy. So we're eating lunch. Dexter's a captain of the Ontario Police Department. We sit down, and then this other cop walks in the restaurant that we're eating at. And he's like, oh, hey, Dexter, man, how you doing, man? Oh, good to see you here. And Dexter's like, oh, man, I'm doing good. He's like, oh, man, just take a seat, man. Like, just eat with us. So another black officer. So then we're sitting here chatting. My dad's just sitting there kicking it. And then another black officer walks in. And I'm like, in my mind, I'm thinking, like, is this where all the black officers come to eat for lunch or whatever? So he's like, oh, man, good seeing you, brother. Like, man, come sit down and take a seat. And then one other black officer walks in. So now I'm sitting with like 4 of these black officers and my dad. And in my mind, what I realized what Dexter was doing was he was trying to recruit me into the profession. Exactly. It was a recruitment tactic. So I'm just thinking like, oh my goodness, I can't believe this. And so anyways, like I was listening. I was like, okay, yes, cool talk, whatever. So fast forward, I finally was like, man, like insurance isn't working out. Abercrombie & Fitch isn't working out. So I prayed. I said, God, like if this is what you want me to do, then open the door. If not, close the door. So I prayed about it. And man, the doors just flew off the hinges. Like I went through the physical agility test, passed, flying colors. Then I went through and I did it for I did it for Chino Police Department and Orange County Sheriff's Department. And it got like I was going so fast through the process, it got to a point where both of the agencies were like, hey, what do we have to do to get you to come work here? And I was like, well, shoot, give me a freaking job. Like I need some work. So whoever hires me, that's where I'm going. And it came down to Chino, and they were like, hey, man, like, we really want you to work here. Chino was only like 10 minutes from where I lived. If I went to Orange County, I was going to have to drive like 45 minutes to an academy. So, man, I got hired, went to the academy. And what was interesting was even in the academy, I was like, man, I don't know if this is for me. Like, I don't know if I want to do this. Like, I feel like I'm a sellout. Like, I feel like I'm that guy. So I graduated number 2 overall in my class. So I missed number 1 by like 0.04%. And the reason I say that is because it was weird. Like law enforcement, it just came easy to me. Like the scenarios, the shooting, everything just came easy to me. It was natural. Where I saw some of my partners in my class, they were struggling on certain things. Like I never struggled. Like in my mind, it was always common sense. Like making decisions was common sense. So I graduated, went on field training, my field training program. And I remember going on field training, and I still felt like, man, I don't know if this is it. Like every time I pull people over, I feel like I'm messing with people. And I feel like I'm just like picking on people. I just didn't feel like this was it. And part of that was because I was in field training. You know how field training is. Like you got to do it the way your field training officer tells you to do it.
Right.
And it's their way or the highway. And so I didn't like the style that they were doing it. And so it wasn't until I got off of training, which I didn't think I was going to make it off training. I was like, man, I don't know if I'm going to make it. And that's when it clicked. I was like, man, like, this is fun. Like, I can do this. I could do it my way, and I can go out there and kind of bridge that gap between law enforcement and community.
When was this?
This was in 2013. I got hired 2013, and I graduated 2014 from the academy. So March 2014 is when I graduated.
What was your style?
So
that you realized you developed, and you said, okay, I could do this.
My style was, man, like, just being a human to people. Like for example, if I pulled you guys over for a traffic citation, I hate the cop that walks up to my door, license, registration, please. No smile, no nothing. It's all business. Now again, I say this cautiously because I know that there's going to be people that listen to this and be like, well, like that's just how their style is. I'm not saying that that's a wrong style. Everybody has their own style, but it wasn't my style. My style was, hey, how you doing? I hope you're having a good day, man. Is there a certain reason why you're going so fast? Like, where are you headed to? Like, just super easy going, but always in the back of my mind, I was always thinking tactically, and you always get more bees with honey. And so that was always my style. I always had a really good ability to talk to people and network with people, and that's how I wanted to do it. But I felt like sometimes with my partners at the time who were field training officers, they didn't care. They were just like, we're here to get business done. And it was my style was often mistaken as I was too nice. I'm too jovial. I was told multiple times, you're too jovial. And in my mind, I was thinking like, well, why the heck did you freaking hire me? I thought that's why you hired me, because you thought I was a good personality. And I always used to tell people, like, don't take my kindness for a weakness. Like, don't get it twisted. And that's why I bring up where I grew up. Is like, I grew up in a place where I had a fight. I grew up in a place where I would never forget, we got out of track practice, and there's this guy walking up the street just firing a gun up the street, like broad daylight. I remember going to graduation parties and people shooting at us, like so I said, don't mistake the kindness for a weakness. My cousins were involved in gangs, but I was able to hold my own without having to be a freaking jerk. So that was my style.
Have you always been a good communicator?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I was ASB. I was president ASB. So
okay. that goes a long way. And I like how you talked about, there's a lot of young officers that come out and they have a hard time just speaking to somebody. Mm-hmm. And as opposed to, because you have to be extremely cautious and aware when you're walking up to a car window, because anything can happen. But also, you have to be charismatic in a way.
Absolutely.
And when you go up there with a not a kind, but if you go up there just like a relaxed, if you go up there strict and rigid, that's you're giving off that energy. You're gonna get it back.
Oh, 100%.
Especially in certain parts of town.
100%.
So have you been a field training officer yourself yet?
I have.
Do you teach your recruits and your rookies to have their own personality, or do they more model yours?
So my goal as a field training officer was to figure out what type of style, what type of like personality my trainee had, and then maximize whatever it is and make them the best at that, but also give them other traits to maybe do it better. So I would always tell people, like, look, I don't want you to be like me. I want you to be you. The moment you start trying to be somebody you're not, people will pick up on that. Like, I don't expect. There were some guys, I had some trainees that were like some straight up Poindexter, like no swag, no nothing. I'm like, look, I don't want you walking up and trying to be that swag guy, because people are just gonna they're gonna call BS. But what I can get you to do is just be yourself and just be normal, and just always have a plan in the back of your mind. I don't know who our audience is, but always have a plan in your mind to respond. I don't even who is our audience, by the way. I just want to make sure. Is it mostly cops?
Cops, fire, it's a lot of civilians.
Okay, so we're always trained, always have a plan in the back of your mind to respond to threats. I'll leave it at that. So I always told my trainees, like, look, like, be you, but always be thinking like the soccer mom, whoever, they can be the one that poses a threat to you. So you don't want to be soft by any means, because if you're soft, people can pick up on that and they will capitalize on that. Like, for example, like I would always tell my trainees, there's no reason why the people that we're dealing with in the community should know that you're a rookie when you're with me. I don't want, like, the only way I want them to know that you're a rookie is if they ask you a question, you're kind of confused on something, but they should not be able to tell you're a rookie based on your command presence or lack thereof. And I had trainees that will walk up, they will walk behind me, and it was my pet peeve, like, stop walking behind me. Like, walk with me or walk in front of me, but don't walk behind me. If you're talking to people, have your shoulders back. Like, you have to realize when people call 911, you are the calm to their storm. And if you show up and they feel like you're not about to be able to calm their storm, then why show up in the first place? And so, to answer your question, I always wanted to make sure I had to study them first, and then once I studied them, it was my job to maximize their best personality without trying to change them. And I think where field training officers get it wrong is we expect our trainees to adapt to me and my style, but that's why we screw up sometimes with some of these trainees, is because we're getting them to do something that they're not.
So here in Dallas, we do the field training program with their field trainers, right? So you have a senior corporal who has gone through the field training program, and their job more or less is to teach you how the department wants you to handle situations. But then we also have a little T program where you're no longer on training, but you're going to ride with a senior guy. And I think the little T is almost more important than the FTO program, because the FTO program, you learn a lot of that in the academy, right? How the department wants you to do it. I had to field train people, and I realized very quickly, if I tell them, hey, this is how the department wants you to do it, but this is how we're going to do it today, all of a sudden I just taught them how not to do things, right? Or how to do things and maybe cut corners here, or this is what they say we're going to do, but this is what we're really doing.
Yeah.
That's not the role of the field training officer. But when you get to little T, that's kind of when you're like, hey, listen, like, I know your FTO told you this. Here's another way we can solve this exact same problem in a different way. It's not against the rules.
Yeah.
This is a different way to do it. And it's not necessarily I have to teach you exactly how the department wants it. Like, general order says you're going to do this. But Joe had the opportunity to take a lot of those guys on little T and show them, hey, now, granted, yes, that's how we're going to do it. This is another way to do it. This is another way to do it. We can skin this cat so many different ways.
Yeah.
So I get the FTO by the book thing, because you have to, right?
Yeah, you have to.
As an FTO, you have to teach them that. But also that a good FTO can mix, hey, this is exactly how we're going to do it. Find your way to present
100%.
yourself. You know, and it's not, the robot cop is not always the best cop, right? I love the charisma of a lot of these officers that come through, and they've all got different styles. They come from different areas. And that's the beauty of a large department, is we don't just have a bunch of hometown kids that are doing the same thing.
Yeah.
We've got people from all over the country, all over the world, really. We get people from other countries coming in here to be police officers. So to have an FTO that can, number one, realize you don't have to be me.
Yeah.
Let's be you, but let's figure out what makes you work. I love the fact that you put it that way.
Yeah, I have a couple of friends of mine that came on, and we are very similar athletes, college athletes. One of them actually went pro, and a lot of us struggled in training. But if you think about it, I know, me personally, athletes make phenomenal cops. But we process things differently. We understand things differently based on your personality. And so if you have that cop that is just like, you have to do it this way, those are the ones that will mistake and say, oh, we got to get rid of this guy, or we got to get rid of this girl. And it's like, you're potentially getting rid of a phenomenal cop. You just don't know how to train them. And so I am so big on, and the only reason I say it is because there were guys that mistook me that way. And if they would have did like they do to other people and say, hey, we're going to get rid of them because they don't fit the mold, then I would never be here talking to you guys, because nobody saw my potential.
Once you hit the street, what were some of your biggest changes you saw within yourself, though, once you got out there and you actually saw how it was, as opposed to maybe it was different than what you thought it would be when you got out there?
I think I understood, once I got onto the street, I got to understand the what, the why, and the how of what we do in law enforcement. Like, that was always lacking. So even though I didn't like law enforcement, I didn't understand the what, the why, and the how. And so when I got to be on that stage and be on calls where people are cussing you out, or when you are the one in the situation, you have to make that critical decision. It explained so much. You know, part of the reason why I started my organization, Breaking Barriers United, was when Michael Brown was killed in Ferguson. And when Michael Brown was killed in Ferguson, I'll never forget the feeling I had after that. I was the new cop, and I remember just thinking like, man, like, this freaking sucks. I'm a black cop, and so people in my community hate cops. So they look at me as a sellout. But then I remember, like, there are officers that don't understand the climate between the minority community and law enforcement. And so in their mind, they're like, man, like, there's no legitimacy to what the claims of the minority community are. And so I felt like I was in this middle place that nobody really understood me. And then I had a conversation with my mom, and my mom, who, again, we weren't always pro law enforcement. We weren't anti, but we weren't pro. My mom was like, you know, after thinking about Michael Brown's situation and looking at all the facts centered around it, she was like, I got to thinking about what my pumpkin would do, because she still calls me Pumpkin. I call her right now. She's like, hey, Pumpkin, where you at? And she was like, I got to think about what Pumpkin would do. And she was like, what it came down to was like, I realized like you would have probably did the exact same thing as that officer, because you want to come home to your wife and your kids at the end of the night. And that's where this light bulb went off. And I said, wow, like, it's crazy that my mom only sees things differently because her son is a cop. And so when we talk about, you know, what changed for me is I was now the one having to make these critical decisions. I was the one in the shoes. I was the one that was making split-second decisions, and the rest of the community didn't understand what we were doing. Where we have failed in law enforcement, and I think the last 5 or 10 years we've been getting so much better, but prior to that, where we failed in law enforcement was we failed to explain why we do what we do. We go out there, we take names and numbers, and we bounce. And when you do that, you leave the community unstuck, and so now they got to fill in the gaps somehow. There's going to be, in their mind, they're going to fill in gaps. And so if you don't give them what they need to fill in those blank spots in their mind, they will fill it in with something else. And so I understood that, and I said, I'm going to go out there and educate people on the what, the why, and the how. And there were people in law enforcement like, oh, well, now you want to give away tactics, and oh, you give away. I'm like, bro, like, the odds of you actually like getting, and I'm not saying it won't happen, but the odds of you actually getting killed by somebody because they were studying some podcast in tactics are like 1%. Not saying it can't happen, but the odds of you getting into a situation where you might need that same community to come have your back are a lot higher. So I'm one of those guys. Let's play the odds.
We need the community, and going on education, this long form of communication and podcasting. You know, these podcasts are getting longer and longer. When I had the idea for this, it was going to be a half-hour episode, 45-minute max. You cannot get enough out there, and especially once you start talking to people like this conversation here, we're already half hour in, and we haven't even got So you're like in a time warp, but you need to have long form of communication as far as even education. And when it comes to education, I think educating the communities and other officers actually too on like use of force. Can you kind of talk about the use of force continuum and
Oh, I love educating people on use of force, man. So we live in these fantasy worlds that officers can only use force in these situations. I'm talking about civilians for the most part. And then we have the real world. And so I actually created a series on YouTube called Switch, where we actually switch the roles between law enforcement and the community. We basically immerse them into the role of law enforcement officers. Now, people will say, oh, well, people already do that. You know, we have the simulate, what is it called, the simulator or whatever, which, by the way, I was doing simulators before simulators were a thing. I do got to say that. But what we did is we took it to another level. So we said, no, we're not just going to do a simulator, because it's easy to get in front of a screen and be like, oh, wow, yeah, they shot me. Oh, wow, like I would have died. Like, there's no stress in that. There is a little bit, but not crazy. But when you put civilians in a situation where simunitions are coming back at you, it changes things.
Yeah.
Like, especially when you see how fast those things come in. Like, so that's what we did is we said, no, like, I'm a private company, so it's not like the department has to be liable for anything. So I said, what we're going to do is we're going to recreate real scenarios, like stuff you see on videos, and we have simunition weapons, and we're going to have you do it. And, man, we've had some people get jacked up. But why? Because I want them to understand the thought process of thinking. If you're afraid that it's simunitions coming back around at you. Imagine what it's like when you're afraid that you think a real bullet or a real knife is coming back at you. So when they experience it, I've had some people like it's completely altered everything.
Total vapor lock.
Oh, total vapor lock. And they're like, what the heck just happened? And it's just mind blowing. And what's even more cool is I've even had people that were anti-cops go through these, and then they've actually hit me up like, hey man, so are you guys actually hiring, man? Like, I'm like, oh, you want to be a cop now? So, but use of force for me is one of those things that I think is so important to educate people on what the use of force continuum is, when we use force, why we use force, how we use force. So that way, the next time you see that viral video, you can take a step back, you take a breather and say, there might be some other facts before I make a prejudgment call on that.
If you actually talk to people, right, you get the understanding. They think we shoot and kill everybody.
Everybody.
But if you looked at the number of contacts we have and the number of officer-involved shootings, like
It's insane.
if police were just walking around killing people, you'd know it, right?
100%.
It'd be pretty obvious. So
The odds of you dying by a police officer are slim to none. You know the top three ways to die. Let's talk about this for a second. So the top 3 ways to die. Number 1 is death by cancer or something like that, or death by medical disease. Number 2, traffic collisions. They might have swapped. Number 3, medical malpractice. Think about that. Number 3, leading cause of death, medical malpractice. What's crazy is we still go to the doctors when we get sick.
So my grandma, I had a medication I was taking. It was making me horribly ill. And I was visiting my parents, and my grandparents were there. And so I was telling her how I didn't feel well. And she said, Kent, you understand that doctors are just people, right? And I said, yeah, that's obvious. You know, I'm not a kid anymore.
Yeah.
And she says, well, you know, they say doctors practice medicine. And I was like, yeah. And she goes, they're practicing on you.
100%.
And I was like, light bulb.
Yeah,
Boom.
and I think people miss that. I think when we're raised, we think, oh, practice medicine. Like it sounds like this technical term. No, like they're legitimately practicing. And so people don't understand. Like if you are the 3rd leading cause of death is medical malpractice, but you'll still go to urgent care when you get sick. The 2nd leading cause of death is traffic collisions, but yet you still get in your car every day. So in our society, we have created this fear of police. But the actual odds that you're going to die by police are less than 1%. So that's where it's like, we got to come back to reality here and start like, we need to start taking, and what the other scary part about this and which is actually making its way up on this list is your kids are more likely to have a bad encounter with a drug than they are to have a bad encounter with a police officer. Like, let that set in. Like, your kid is more likely to have a bad encounter with fentanyl or cocaine, whatever it may be, than they are to have a bad encounter with a police officer.
Fentanyl's going crazy here right now. How about in California?
Oh, it's going crazy in California.
Yeah.
Basically, talk about reality-based training with the sim rounds, and the great Kevin Navarro and Keith Winsel brought that to DPD back in 2008ish or something like that. It was back then, and I was one of the original reality-based training instructors. I went through the training, and we actually put officers through scenarios, and it went beyond the shoot, don't shoot scenarios that you would see. But it was basically had actors, and you put people through scenarios, and the sim rounds are going back at you like you're talking about. It's evolved so much since when we started, but I would put officers through there, and it didn't matter what tenure they've had on or where they worked or anything. Everybody reacted differently. You added stress. But we've actually had activists and city council people come out, and our department has put them through there, and they don't look stellar. Because it's I mean, you have to make decisions at warp speed, weigh legality, you have to weigh the policies and also the laws, and you just have to make a decision in split seconds.
Well, that's a real life scenario.
Yeah.
In these pretend scenarios, there is no consequence other than you get.
Other than looking bad in front of your friends.
Yeah.
But it can make people self-aware. Damn, I need to work on that.
100%.
I need, you know what I mean? So it at least plants a seed. Then you're going to have some people that go through that are let's say anti-law enforcement, anti-cops, they go through and they're like, well, if they do look like shit, they shoot somebody when they should, and they go, well, I don't have all this training they have. And they're just, you're never going to change that mind. But
all the training that we have now, but in the same breath, we don't train.
But what it comes down to, and I always tell people that too, because it's like, yes, I get there is a level of training that goes into being an officer. But what it comes down to, one of the things I said at the beginning of this podcast, I said, I always looked at being an officer as having common sense. And if you have common sense, I can add the training and tactics to it later. But any person that has tactic or common sense should be able to navigate police scenarios. Yeah, there might be some better ways to handle it, tactically speaking, but if you have common sense, how to talk to people, how to get out of situations, you can't put an excuse on that.
Ryan, we're talking about the training and the way that public can perceive what we're doing and with not having the experience. And yes, you can have tons of training and tons of experiences, but there's so many other factors that go into decision making on that particular day, right? You could have a lot of training, years, months, weeks, being perfect or somewhat perfect. Nothing's perfect. And then they have a moment, a human moment, they slip up and they made a decision that they shouldn't have made.
Yeah.
And it's easy to get attacked for it.
Very, very easy to get attacked. It's scary, man, because, we're so much easier in lenient on other professions. We have so much grace for other professions, but law enforcement is one of those professions where we don't get much grace. Like you make a mistake, there's no compassion or nothing. And again, law enforcement is kind of complicit in this. We never really developed relationships with some of the members of our community. So I think we're going in the right direction, and I think we're trending right. I think law enforcement has figured it out, but that's why I like podcasts like this. That's why my organization exists, so that way we can also get community members up to speed. Like, why would you not want to invest into your public safety? Why?
They're not the lawmakers, and the people that are actually changing the law, and some of the people that scrutinize us the most don't live in. They're not being terrorized daily, and so when we respond to an outcry, which a 911 call is an outcry. We are doing the best we can. We're not going to be perfect, and it doesn't. We go to a scene when I'm working in South Dallas. Yeah, the chances I encounter somebody that is a minority is extremely high.
Yeah, because that's the area. That's what the area makeup is.
Right, because the people that called about the problem are more than likely minority themselves.
Correct.
So
that happens more often than not. It's not the guy going out there saying, "I'm gonna go find me a minority today." Like, no, like it doesn't. Have we made mistakes in law enforcement? Absolutely. And I'm not one of those guys to sit here and say like law enforcement's never made mistakes. Law enforcement has never had racist people that work in the profession. But to sit here and say that it's systematic, you can't do that. I always tell people I'm still waiting on taking a class where they tell me how to be systematically racist.
Yeah, no, I grew up. I've talked about this before on this show. I grew up in in Oak Cliff area, Dallas, which is, I was from kindergarten to third grade, I was the only white kid in class.
Yeah, Oak Cliff is no joke.
Yeah, and it wasn't in I'm
that is why Joe has so much swag, though.
I could tell.
Right, yeah. But I didn't look at it that way. It wasn't a thing. And I've talked about it before that if it's a behavior thing, when I'm out working in, whether it's Pleasant Grove, which is kind of a mix of everything, and then you have South Dallas, which is predominantly African American community. It's a behavior thing. I am reacting based on your behavior, whether it's not because of how you look.
Correct.
It's your behavior.
Correct. Absolutely. And I think we just have to, I think most people in law enforcement are like that. Like 90% like that, maybe even 95%. There are those ones I saw, what was it recently? There was a shooting, I can't remember where it happened, where the guy was in, like, there was a fight in a bar. I don't know if you guys saw, there was a fight in a bar. The officer showed up, and the guy that actually tried to break up the fight took a gun away from somebody. So then he walks to the door, and he ends up getting shot by the officer coming out because the officer sees him with the gun in his hand. So the actual shoot itself is probably going to be justified because, I mean, the officer perceived a threat, deadly threat, so he responds. But what was interesting about that whole case is if you look at the text messages of the officer, it was a white officer that shot a black guy. It was over 100 some odd text messages of just like racial, homophobic, like all these different things that are going on between other officers. And that's the scary part. And that's where it's like you have this one guy that the media and all these other people are going to say, look, see, I told you. This is the system that I'm talking about. And those situations, they're one off. But yet it makes it so much hard when we have officers in law enforcement that do this nonsense, like we are our own worst enemies. And so that's the stuff that pisses me off, because I'm like,
Well, we all suffer from it. I mean, the
All of us.
professions suffer from it, and I've been called racist, and it pisses me off because I'm like, well, listen, hell, I've done more. I've done more for the African American community of helping them, helping actual people that are in these neighborhoods that are being terrorized by their own race. I know I've done more to help them than some yuppie that lives up in Wiley that's wanting to do a post and putting a filter on on their profile pic and just calling me a racist. I'm not. So that's very frustrating.
If you want to find out if somebody's a racist, call them a racist and see how they react.
that's a good point.
If it bothers you, you're probably not a racist.
Yeah.
If it doesn't bother you, you probably are racist, right? So at a certain point, you've got to realize if someone apologizes for something they said or something they did, that doesn't make them the racist, right?
Correct.
They're saying, hey, I didn't want to do that. Like, that's not who I am, and I'm sorry that I did it.
Correct.
That's not the heart of a racist. A
No.
racist is like, yep, said it, meant it.
Exactly. Well, it's like being married. Like, I've been married for over 10 years. We've been married for 12 years now. And, if me and my wife get in an argument, there's times where I'll ask her, like, was my intent to hurt you? Or was I just being an idiot and didn't realize that I was hurting you? And you guys are married, like, so you guys know what I'm talking about. Like, usually when we make the mistakes, I'm not like intentionally like, oh man, I'm gonna screw her day up today. Like, I am intentionally not taking out the trash today to piss her off. No, it's usually because we weren't thinking, we had a lapse of judgment. And so it's almost the same concept as like, look at the intent of the officer. Was he intentionally calling or targeting you because of your race? Or was he targeting you because he has a job to investigate crimes and things in his city? And did you fit a criminal profile? Was your taillight really out? Like, oh, my taillight wasn't out. Was it really, or was it not? Like, so like, those are things that people don't understand.
Well, then you're asking people to take accountability for what they did and to actually stop and think about what maybe somebody else perceived, right?
Correct.
And that's
a hard thing to do for people.
Well, especially as adults, we don't like being told what to do.
No.
I don't.
No.
I have a boss. I have to kind of do what he says. Shout out Chief Foy.
Shout out Chief Foy.
But
Jeremy.
Shout out Chief
no,
Foy.
it's Richard when he's chief.
Yeah.
But yeah, for sure. I mean, nobody likes being told what to do. And so now that you're in a position where you're telling adults what to do, and adults that sometimes are dealing with their own children in those same situations, it's difficult to
hard pill to swallow for people.
It is, and it's understandable. But as a police officer, now you have to understand, like, hey, you're talking to an adult as an adult and trying to be one step above them. You got to accept that sometimes they're going to not accept that very well.
Yeah, we have to be the bigger person. I always say, when you signed up to take this badge on, you basically signed up to be the bigger person, even though it may not be right.
And that takes us all the way back around to when the police screw up. Like, we don't have a margin of error. Our margin of error is very, very slim, especially when it involves force. You can't punch somebody you didn't mean to punch.
Correct.
Right? You can't shoot somebody you didn't mean to shoot.
Correct.
And that's where it's different than every other profession. Right?
Absolutely.
Our margin of error is pretty much zero. We can't get it wrong.
Absolutely.
And we do get it wrong, and that's the human portion of it. But I don't accept it. Right? I wouldn't accept it if a police officer did me wrong.
No. I always ask people, like, I tell cops, I talk to cops all the time. I'm speaking in Albany, New York in a couple of days, and I'm going to tell them the same thing. It's like, what officer do you want showing up at your door when you call 911? Like, if you look at it from that perspective, like, we are operating in a job where we're cops. Great. Okay, but what happens when you call 911? Because it's not a matter of if you have to call 911, it's a matter of when you call 911. Every single one of us is going to go through our own emergencies in life. So do you want that same officer that's going to be a prick showing up at your door, or do you want to be that guy that you want that somebody else that calls for? You know what I mean? So, yeah, man, I can go on for days. I'm passionate about this.
Well, I want to talk about the dangers of emotion-based conversation versus fact-based conversation, especially going in and when it's talked about law enforcement in this profession.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have to leave our emotions at the door. Let's start there. You have to leave emotion. Anytime you're looking at law enforcement or thinking about what's going on, you have to leave your emotions at the door, because law enforcement is not a pretty profession. I mean, I don't care how you slice it. Like, I think the perception or in our minds, and this is coming from somebody who hated cops. In our minds, we have this idea that law enforcement officers are supposed to be nice, and they're supposed to be generous, and they're supposed to be, treat everybody like a certain way.
Like Mayberry.
Exactly, like Mayberry. And so, but it's not like that. If you have to realize, 95% of an officer's job is spent with 5% of the community that are committing 95% of the problems. So over time, we, unfortunately, as law enforcement officers, start to view life through the lens of the 5% rather than the 95%. But the same can be said about the community. The community sees 5% of the bad interactions that happen online, and so they start to view life through the lens of the 5% rather than 95% of the law officers that are doing everything right. So the only way to avoid that is you have to operate absent of your emotions. That means, like, for example, if force is being used, recognize that force is being used, and there's probably a reason why force is being used. Don't just react based on how the force is used. And then the other thing too is now we have to, once you rid yourself of the emotions, let's introduce the facts. Let's introduce the context. Why did this start? How did it start? What happened? Were there different angles? And when you start to see things through a factual lens, then it allows the emotional lens to be a little bit more palatable. It doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be easy to digest, but it means it's more palatable when you understand the facts behind it. But we live in a microwave society where we want information in 2 seconds. And so we've been conditioned to swipe up and swipe down and swipe left and swipe right. And so all you're doing is seeing the shock value of that incident without having any of the factual data. And you've already made your determination and feelings about this incident absent of all facts. So that's why it's so important for us to say, hey, look, let me slow down. Let me look at the facts, and then I will allow myself to react emotionally.
Well, you think social media had a huge portion to do with a lot of this,
almost
right?
all of it.
It captures a lot of emotion, and it's almost instantaneous, and it goes viral, and then it's gone, right? But if you go back to just traditional media too, we mentioned Mayberry, right? How often did Andy and Barney get in trouble, right?
Yeah.
They didn't do much. I mean, Barney was always screwing up something, but it was never something Andy couldn't fix. But nowadays, your big TV shows are corrupt cops, bad cops. It's never the good cops anymore.
Cops doing, like, breaking the law on everything.
Right. And that's just not the case. I mean, it does happen, right? It happens, obviously, or else it wouldn't be on TV. But that's the main focus now. There's never just a show where the day goes perfect for the police officers.
Well, there's corruption everywhere. There's corruption in the churches. There's corruption in politics, damn sure in politics, and there's corruption in police. Going back to
say it ain't so.
Yeah, look how many consent decrees in L.A. I mean, no,
Man.
I mean, so it's you because you have the human. It's take away the profession, but insert human. You're gonna have all the devil on the shoulder and the angel on the shoulder, and some people will fall on either side, and sometimes they'll go back and forth. But it doesn't matter what you do or training. You're a human.
You're human. You can't remove the human element.
No.
And social media has removed that human element. Like I said, when I talked to my mom saw the human in me, which is what changed her reality. So, I always tell cops, perception is a huge thing. It's an important thing. And you have cops that want to operate, well, no, perception is just perception. The reality is this. But it's like, but if you operate in that realm, then what you're negating is the fact that the people in your community, their perception has become their reality. Yeah. And so if their perception of law enforcement is we're corrupt and we're this and we're that, that is their reality. So you have to address the perception of our profession, because once you address that, then you can start changing and altering a person's reality. I always think it's so ironic that, all these shows show crooked and corrupt cops, but the number one type of entertainment shows on TV are cop shows. So always people say people love to hate us. People love us.
Well, but going back to like the social media and people educate or get where they get their information. A lot of people only get their information from a certain source that subscribes to their beliefs.
Correct.
And they don't want to hear. And they won't listen to any other perspective because it doesn't make them feel good.
Correct.
It goes against what they already had their mind made up on.
Correct.
And that's very dangerous in this information gathering. And internet is it is the leading culprit.
You got to get out of your vortex. I wrote a book called Happy Eyes, and in that book, oh my man, yeah. So in that book, I actually start the book off, and I tell people to do this activity. I say, get out of your comfort zone. I said, I want you to look and try to find somebody that does not subscribe to what your system is. It doesn't mean that you got to think like them. It doesn't mean that you have to talk like them. It don't even mean like you have to like them. But what it does do is it allows you to see other perspectives. So that way you have a more well-rounded viewpoint of where you stand. Don't just stand there because somebody told you to. And I think I try to live my life that way. I was raised Democratic, and I'm not a Democratic. I don't vote Democratic anymore. You know what I mean? I'm more conservative than anything.
And I think a lot of people get caught up so much in tribal communities, and you're either one side or to this side, and I don't agree with 100% of anybody on everything.
No.
So if it's like, oh, I'm going to vote just this because I hate this other side, I think that's stupid. I think it should be some
nonsense.
sort of centered thinking, because you got to look at logic at some point.
Know why you're voting for what you're voting for.
Right.
That's why I say, like, for me, I don't even like to identify as a Republican in the standpoint of, like, I am one of those guys that I want to look at all the things that come across, read up, and this is why I vote, because this is what my morality compass or my moral compass points me towards. And everything is so divisive, but now it's tribal. I grew up Democrat, so I'm gonna vote Democrat. I grew up Republican, so I'm gonna vote Republican. And politicians are taking advantage of that, like, tremendously. I would say one side does it way more than the other side. I'm not going to go into who that is, but it's tribal.
Yeah, it's very tribal, and and policing in this day and age of people just wanting to get likes and shares, it's so dangerous, and it's just not just danger for this profession, but just society.
Yes,
people are so addicted to posting something, and they want to, and I guarantee they're sitting there refresh, looking at how many more likes and shares they get, and it's not a way to live your life.
It's so weird. It's so weird that, I mean, just the people that will take a picture of absolutely everything, and you're just like, you're missing the whole point of it.
Of how the meal, I've had asparagus too. I don't need to see your photos of it.
Let's take it a step further. The person that's filming somebody that's actually having a catastrophe in their life, somebody's dying, man, I'd rather film it because it's going to go viral than actually try to intervene and try to save this person's life.
That's a reality there. That happens every day.
All the time.
I want to get into bad cops versus bad decisions on a particular day. You could be a bad human being at core, but still do good work. But you can also be a great human being with great training, and you have a half career of making great decisions, but that particular day, it could go wrong. It could just go terribly wrong, and that decision and that certain incident sadly comes to define a lot of people.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, you're right, man. I think, no matter what profession you're in, you're going to have bad of everything. But it doesn't necessarily mean they're corrupt. You know what I mean?
They're bad people,
It's bad quality people. Like, and I think we're seeing that right now in law enforcement. I actually just saw a recruiting video in I think it was Detroit Police Department.
They're dancing involved?
No,
okay, good.
No, this is a crazy one. I've seen this a couple times already.
I need to look at it.
So they're basically gonna help people clear up their records, like basically help get rid of the warrants, their traffic tickets and things for them. They're gonna basically hold your hand through the physical agility process and stuff like that in order to get you to a point to where you could pass the test. And so I have a couple of thoughts on that. So number one is, as cops, so if you're listening to this as a cop, because the way it came up on my feed was leftist police department is doing this and that or whatever. So we have to consider, the couple things we have to consider is, number one is, like, they're trying to think outside the box to get more people in their talent pool. Right. So is it more of them being leftist, or is it them trying to find people, just trying to get them into the department? Because if you don't have anybody applying, you gotta start reaching. Do I agree with the way they're handling it? No, but if you're throwing stuff at the wall, nothing is sticking, you're gonna try to figure it out. The flip side of that is like, that's why we have an obligation to change the way people view law enforcement. Like, nobody wants to be a cop right now. It's the number one problem in law enforcement. Number one problem in law enforcement right now is recruiting and retention, no matter where other than mental health and mental wellness.
I think those go hand in hand.
They do. They go hand in hand. So I understand why it's easy for us as cops, like, oh, this freaking leftist department. But in their mind, they're just trying to throw stuff at the wall, see what sticks. And so it comes down to is, who is ultimately going to be impacted by this?
Community.
The community. And all of us are part of the community, because when you guys go home, when you're not, when you're not in your official capacity, you're affected by it. So we have to look at that and say, we have to draw a line in the sand and say, no, we have to fix this problem. Like, what happened to the days where you showed up ready for your physical agility exam, as opposed to the freaking police department having to hold your hand to do it? What happened to the days of you freaking fix your record first before the police department? What happened to the days of don't go out there and get a crazy record so you can get but we're having to lower standards, and when you lower standards, the community is ultimately going to be impacted by it. So I'm not casting shade on Detroit, just because in my mind, the way I look at it is like, they have to think outside the box. But at the same time, this is a community issue in order to find good quality people, because if you don't find those good quality people, trust and be sure that you will have a terrible cop show up at your door, and you're going to be pissed off.
And the department and the profession is going to suffer because of
100%.
that. That's looking a day down the road as opposed to looking 5 years down the road of what could happen. And then I think that could possibly breed corruption, and also you're setting people up for failure by hiring bad people because you lowered your standard. Because I get it, you need bodies. Everybody needs bodies. Hell, we just graduated academy class of 14 in Dallas PD.
Are you serious?
Yeah, just last Friday. And that is the reality in the retention and the hiring.
Wow.
Who the hell wants to be a cop and go through what the news shows? And then I'll be honest, the news talk about doing things that are ultimately going to hurt communities. The news casts us in such a light a lot of the times. Not everybody. I'm not totally
living in
shitting
California.
Oh no, no, thank you, no, thank you. But they have to deal with that. The news is it shows snippets because why? Likes and shares and getting traction on what they show.
If it bleeds, it reads, is what they say.
And that is so. But it's to the detriment of the community and
100%.
And these damn journalists and even the police. They live in those communities. And I'll be honest, we talk about being left, right, down the middle, or depending on the time of the month, leaning a certain way. Elections matter. Policies matter. Because I was just listening to there was a shooting down down at the Joel Osteen, the church.
I saw that.
Yes, so there was people going, well, we've always been told if we see something, say something. People were actually apparently saying something about this lady, and she had several run-ins with the law, and they're like, well, what more can we do? Officers aren't doing anything about it. Well, you know what? There might be, you don't know. If the officers are making an arrest, and whatever county DA, if they're letting them out, and they're letting them out with monitors, we can only do so much. We really can't. So, and that goes back to elections and getting right people in policy.
Correct. I'm actually going to be interviewing somebody that's running for the district attorney spot in L.A., which is a big deal because right now they have Gascon, which has been, man, that dude like obliterated. Like
it's an S show.
Oh yeah. So I'm interviewing somebody on Monday who's running for that spot, and I'm gonna ask them a lot of these hard questions because ultimately it comes back to the community. The community suffers, and that's why I tell the community, like, you have to be abreast to the laws that you're voting, the bills that you're voting on, what's coming across. Don't just vote like you did a Scantron when you were in high school, CCCCC, and just hope that 50% or 60% of them are correct. Like, actually read the stuff and vote, because if you don't, you're going to be impacted by it. And to your point in politics, man, like, so I don't know if you guys have watched this. I know you've done your homework, but the fall of Minneapolis, it's a prime example of how the media likes to divide people based on they sensationalize everything. And I'm not saying that I completely think that the officers could have reacted differently. I think that they could have reassessed the situation. So I don't want to I will say that part. Like, the officers in the death of George Floyd, they could have reassessed the situation. Like, I've been on calls. I'm sure you guys have been on situations where you just reassess. If he keeps fighting or whatever, put him back on his stomach and then just let him do his thing. But so I think we saw a failure of reassessment on that. But other than that, the way it was spun up as like this was a systematic racial issue and this. And what's sad is that the whole city burned down over something that was not true.
Multiple cities burned.
The whole world
yes.
was going crazy, and then you even saw leadership fail officers in that. Like, when you have your biggest leader on a stand, basically essentially lie on a stand and say, we don't train this way. When you have sergeants say, hey, we don't train this way. And then you look at the policies, and it's clear as day in the policies when you see pictures of the same thing that he was doing. And so I think that whole situation was taken so much out of context for the sake of an agenda and a political agenda. And it's scary. It is very, very scary times we're living in.
It's going to happen again.
Yes.
It will be that recipe. But I think the George Floyd incident, it happened at the worst possible time in our world, as
yes.
far as everybody had been locked in, and you really see the mental health of people deteriorate, and everybody's terrified, and there's still some people terrified riding around in a mask and by themselves in a car. So everybody's terrified.
I saw somebody running outside the other day with a mask on by themselves. I was so confused.
They are too. They're confused as well.
I was thinking, like,
Yeah.
He said, don't get me started.
But,
Sorry.
but it's so interesting though that when that happened, it is like we had the social distancing. You could only buy 2 packs of toilet paper. But once that incident happened, everything got on pause. There was no social distancing.
No.
And it was okay.
No.
And our leaders in the country didn't step up and actually say, hey,
It was
stop.
totally fine.
They encouraged it and it inflamed because it really some people seize that moment to advance themselves and also for more likes and shares in some ways to advance a narrative. And it really crippled this country.
Do you know there are some people right now that legitimately believe that the events that took place at the Capitol were arguably worse than what occurred on 9/11?
Yeah.
No, there's a ton of people that believe that.
Think about that.
Yeah, that's pretty wild.
I remember growing up and I used to watch apocalyptic movies, and I used to think like
Mad Max.
Like, how the heck is this even possible? That's what I used to think in my mind. Like, people turning on each other, people like ready to shoot each other and kill each other. Like, we've all seen the movies. Like, and when we saw COVID happen, when you saw Popeyes come out with a chicken sandwich and the way people were killing each other in line over a chicken sandwich,
It was
sandwich
tasty.
is good, though.
it was pretty tasty, though. I will say, arguably, it was pretty tasty. But the thing is like, they say, we're 3 days away from starvation. So when the next critical event like that happens, the next, whatever it's called, sickness or whatever it's called, the pandemic, pandemic happens, a natural disaster happens. Like, if we don't start pulling stuff together now, like if we don't start learning how to work together now, then we are literally doomed. Like they always say history repeats itself. And the biggest threat of the United States is not a threat that's outside of the United States. It's a threat that's going to come from within. And we are much stronger united than we are divided. And other people around the world are going to capitalize that. They capitalize on that. Because they know, like, if the more we can divide people, the nation will fall. And so
other countries are rooting for that.
Oh,
they really
100%.
are. They're
100%.
sitting grinning watching some of the
it's
vision we have.
It's their reality TV. It's their network. It's their reality TV show.
Well, being 2024, I guarantee you, there's some other country leaders that are sitting here grinning and getting their popcorn out, watching.
It's coming. It's election year.
I know. I'm terrified of what's coming, and I do have hope that what happened in 2020 with the pandemic and the reaction to the pandemic, and then what happened to the George Floyd incident, that we maybe will learn something. That's what I'm hoping. Because
Yes.
because we are going to have another sickness. Hopefully not in my lifetime, and hopefully not in my daughter's lifetime, but it's going to happen, and you know that, and we're going to have another bad reaction to a police incident that wasn't done properly. And I think there's going to be, sadly, it's probably going to be spun in a way to make it look like something that it's not, and it's going to start a firestorm.
Yeah, even though I sound like I'm negative Nancy, so if you're listening to this like, dang, this dude's a negative dude, I'm not, I promise you.
No.
I look at things from an optimistic lens. I'm actually I'm a huge an optimist.
You wouldn't do what you do if you were
not at all. So I think we actually have a lot more hope than people realize. There were, as bad as it was when George Floyd and the whole situation with the pandemic, as bad as it was, I think we did learn. I think you're starting to see the pendulum swing the other direction. People are wanting more cops to do this job. People are recognizing the value and importance of public safety. People want to throw more money toward. So I think we are starting to see that pendulum switch. But the reason I'm bringing all these other issues up is because it is election year, and you think people are going to act ugly in these political seats towards the end of the year. Oh, it's going to get nasty. So that's why it's important for us to be prepared before that storm comes.
Yeah, and it is going to happen, and I dread, and there's a part of me that dreads too, and I'm not on the streets anymore, but I really am worried about brothers and sisters out there having to deal with it, because it's coming. It is going to come, and I think a lot of people are going to seize the opportunity to scream one way or the other, and it's just going to be to the detriment of the country.
Yeah, large scale, everybody was confused, right? But small scale, I started to see other things. Like in my neighborhood, people were looking out for the elderly or for the single moms with kids that couldn't leave the house, and so they were like, "Hey, let me know what you need.
Wow,
I have extra this, and I've seen it continue over the years.
That's
and
awesome.
It's really kind of cool. I don't like social media.
Yeah,
I'm addicted to it like everybody else, but I don't like it. Like the principle of it
Necessary
kind of
evil.
pisses me off. But to see people use it for good, like, hey, I've got extra this if anybody needs it. And we've got people in our neighborhoods now that
That's
have
amazing.
They have little gardens, and they're like, hey, I've got too much basil. If anybody needs any fresh basil,
I'm coming to your
come pick it
neighborhood.
up.
Yeah.
It's really interesting though. But we learned all that through crisis, right? Mm-hmm. And we've started coming together more, which takes us right into Breaking Barriers United.
Man.
tell us what's going on with Breaking Barriers United.
Man, so Breaking Barriers United, the short end of it is it's an organization that was designed for everything we're talking about, to bridge the gap between law enforcement and community. We're actually in a huge I don't want to say huge, but we're shifting gears a little bit. So we've expanded everything that we're doing, and we're going through a brand change right now. So it's not just law enforcement and community, but a lot of it is focused on conflict resolution. How do we just resolve conflict in general, not just between law enforcement and the community, but in general. So I speak in schools all across the country. I speak in corporate organizations. I speak to police departments. But we're going to be training up other people to go and do the same work that I'm doing, training people to speak. We're going to be training people to go in there and mentor kids. We also are launching a media side of our thing. So one of the things that we've learned over the years to do pretty well is we put out content. So like you said, the necessary evil, like I'm on social media a lot. I mean, I have
Shout out to your accounts, man.
Oh yeah, so
Yeah, please.
Breaking Barriers United on pretty much everything. So Breaking Barriers United on Instagram, Breaking Barriers United on YouTube, Breaking Barriers United on TikTok. Those are all the different accounts that I'm on, and we've got a pretty good system going, man. So we post about 2 times a day, and we're always doing long form content on YouTube. And there's a lot of people that are like, man, like you guys are just doing so much. So our goal is with my media side of the company, we're going to start helping other people do that and create that same content. And it's not just for law enforcement. So, and then we also have, we're in the process of taking it to another level in the sense of consulting for other larger organizations and businesses when it comes to conflict resolution. So it's been a phenomenal journey, man. I started it about, almost 8 years now, and it's crazy, man.
When you go to try to educate people on this, what kind of challenges do you run across whenever you're trying to do your education piece?
I think some of the challenges I run across would be just more so people not wanting to get out of their own way, and people not wanting to recognize that they have a plank in their own eye. They're so busy trying to remove the speck in somebody else's eye, and there's a plank in their own eye. And, kind of like you guys were saying earlier, it's just accountability or lack thereof. And so I think once people can get out of their own way and recognize what their purpose and why they exist for, then that's when you can start moving forward. And so I think that's the biggest hurdle, but man, you'd be surprised, and we get such good feedback from people. I always love talking to a room of cops, because you always get those guys that sit there with their arms crossed. What is this young guy going to come and tell me about what I don't know? But then once I start talking to them, and once I start breaking down why we got into it and reminding them of their purpose, man, like it's so cool seeing like that light bulb go off and then them walk out the door is just being revitalized to keep doing it.
I like how you take certain incidents that go on across the country and the world, and then you break them down. Why do you do that?
Education. So I talked about earlier about, the lack of education and people not understanding what we do and why we do it. So I break down these critical incidents because, again, remember I said if you don't do it, then they're going to fill that void with something else. They're going to fill that void with the people like your Sean Kings or your D.L. Hugleys that have nothing positive to say about law enforcement, and they're going to run with that narrative. And so I said, let me actually give them some foundational and factual basis to run with. So I will tell you, though, I hate doing it. I hate doing it in the sense of, let me change it. I love doing it, but I hate doing it when I have to do the ones where we mess up.
Yeah.
But it's an evil. It's a necessary evil.
It's important though, because we do mess up. We are human. Every human makes mistakes, and I'm glad that you do that, because otherwise, what do you become? You're only catering to the group that
Correct.
only subscribes to their own beliefs.
Correct.
The ultra-conservative echo chamber.
Correct. And that's
Can't be
what's
that.
probably been my biggest uphill battle sometimes with cops is I will call out us, because you know how it is. Oh, you Monday morning quarterback. It's like, no, I'm not Monday. Well, number one, I don't think there's anything wrong with Monday morning quarterbacking if we can learn from it. It's not taking away from that person's situation, and because we weren't in that. So I want people, I think there's this bad like image of like critiquing and learning from other people's situations. I think it's an actual good thing. So I'm very careful about what I say, and I'm very careful about waiting for facts to come out before I say anything. And when I'm educating people, people mistake education for being like critical of somebody. you know.
No, and I'm glad you do that because we've had a lot of line of duty deaths in Dallas PD's history. There are trainings that we do that we do show mistakes that the officer made. And I think it's important, even like even as far as the range goes, there was an incident as standing off a barrier. That way you could see
Yes.
on both sides of the barrier as opposed to getting
Yes.
too tight because it really limits your views. Things like that. You want, because listen, if
Which we've learned that from you guys. We actually watched that
Yeah.
situation. We
You
learned
know
that
what
from
I'm
you
talking
guys.
about.
I
Yeah,
know
so-
exactly what you're talking about.
So listen, if I do something out in the field and I die in the line of duty, I would take it as an honor if somebody took
a
what
life.
I did wrong and that could help generations
Correct.
of people in my position.
There's a huge difference, though, between some guy who's never played football in his life talking about how Dak Prescott threw too many interceptions and a police officer saying what another police officer did, right? You have institutional knowledge. You've done this job before.
Correct.
If Tom Brady was going to break down film on quarterbacks, remember when Kobe was doing that?
Yeah.
Unreal, right?
Yeah.
When Kobe would break down
Yeah.
individual players.
Absolutely.
You, that's not Monday morning quarterbacking. That's giving knowledge,
Based
And
on your own training experience.
dropping
Exactly.
huge knowledge bombs on people. So I think that's the difference between what you're doing in breaking down videos versus Monday morning quarterback.
I love that.
We're lucky here in Dallas that we have the luxury of having great training and great experiences because of the volume of type of incidents that we respond to. Being in a bigger department, we have access to a lot of training. There's a lot of smaller agencies out there. They don't have all the training. They don't have all the experiences. So having education pieces like this, having long-form communication of breaking down incidents and hearing about officers, how they reacted, how they even admit they could have done better. That is education for these other people that may not have access to it.
You know what's one of the best feelings for me is like, so when I started making these videos, it was for the general civilian population. I get so many messages from people in law enforcement that say, man, like, hey, we played your video in briefing. Hey, we went over your video in briefing. I have a lot of younger officers come in and say, man, I learned it. And it's like, I never realized that I was maybe even helping them. And which kind of brings me back to why I'm actually choosing to get into my back in the patrol car once a month. We kind of talked about that before we got on, but I stepped away from doing full-time policing 2 years ago to focus on growing my organization, which has been phenomenal. But I've always missed being in the police car. Some people look at me like I'm crazy. Like, why would you do that? My wife, she's like nervous because she sees the videos that I make. But I'm one of those guys, like, I want to practice what I preach, and it's a perishable skill. And if I have the opportunity to still be out there in a patrol car, meeting some of the guys, out there interacting with the community, like, that is what I want to do, because I realize it's bigger than me. It's not just about me going out there and just patrolling. It's like, I didn't realize how much, impact I can make on such larger levels.
I want to shift gears and talking about working with Dak Prescott Foundation. Faith, Fight, Finish. Can you talk about that?
Man, so I used to be a 49er fan. Hardcore 49er fan.
We'll edit that out. Don't worry.
Yeah. I was, died through and through my whole life, 49er fan. And about 3 years ago, a little over 3 years ago, right after George Floyd died, Dak had set out on a mission to go ahead and bridge this gap between law enforcement and the community. So we got connected through some mutual friends. We met in person probably a few weeks after that. And one of the things that I immediately realized was that this dude is different. He's cut from a different cloth. And a lot of people don't, I've been around, I know a lot of celebrities, a lot. And, there's a lot of celebrities that are just disconnected, man. They just I don't care. Like, they do it because it's a check the box. They don't do it because they're doing it from the heart. That dude right there, man, he has a genuine care for the community. He has a genuine care for Dallas. Like, this dude is Dallas through and through. And so last year when I saw him get that award for Man of the Year, it was just so phenomenal, because I know I work hand in hand with him as far as with his foundation and stuff, and knowing the time that he puts in, the time that Shannon, who's his executive director, puts in, and so many others, like, his heart is genuinely for the community. So Faith Fight Finish is a phenomenal organization. It was created for multiple reasons. Number one is to combat death by suicide. His brother unfortunately lost his life that way. He also deals with bridging that gap between law enforcement and the community. He puts a lot of research into colon cancer research, which is how his mother passed away. And so there's so many different things that Dak is doing that people don't recognize off the field.
He doesn't promote it.
And he doesn't promote it.
And that's the craziest thing is he wants to support it and he wants to be involved, but he doesn't want it to be Dak Prescott.
Exactly. And I'm like, in my mind, I'm thinking like, man, like
That
is,
says a lot about him.
It says a lot. And so in my mind, I'm thinking like, and this is what the reality is. Let's really think about this. He does not have to do that.
No.
Think about it. Like, that's what people don't understand is he does not have to do any of it. He could literally be the starting quarterback for the number one franchise in all of football, do what he does, have his private family life, and just go into the win. And nobody, and he doesn't have to do it.
You wouldn't expect it from him either.
You wouldn't expect it. He goes out of his way to do it. And I'm talking about putting in time, hours, and that's not only a lot of other people will do things, but they'll pay other people to do it, and then they'll just say, let me know how it goes.
Right.
No, I know for a fact, like that man is like involved. Like when we want to create new curriculums, he's looking at the curriculums. He's sending back corrections like, hey, I want this change. Hey, I don't want. So that dude is like involved. And mind you, these dudes like studying plays and all this other stuff. So, man, I have nothing but positive things to say about Dak Prescott. And so that's why I brought up the 49ers, because I've been a Dallas Cowboy fan for the last 3.5 years. And I'm like, how can I not be a Dallas Cowboy fan when I know the heart behind the man who's leading them?
No, that guy. So we've talked about this before on Chief Ramirez's episode. Wellness Unit has been going about 1.5 years now, and Dak gave we're not going to say them out. He gave a great donation for Dallas Police and for our counseling services. I can't tell you, because I'm on the Assistant Officer Foundation board and I see the financials. We went from spending $183,000 in 2022 and 23. We spent $261,000 on officers counseling. So that shows the need. But we're so grateful for Dak Prescott and his foundation. And this is his vision and his mission. And yeah, you imagine the scrutiny that guy's under.
If I want to share one last story about Dak, because I think it really kind of ties the bow on the heart of him. When I first met him, we met briefly in a hotel, and to just kind of like feel like, understand who I was. And then he invited, he was like, hey man, have you and your wife don't get out much because you have kids? He was like, yeah man, take your wife over to the steak restaurant. We went to Nick and Sam's.
That's my place.
Oh, I love that place, man. So we went over to Nick and Sam's, just me and my wife. So then Dak comes back later because he had finished whatever meetings he had, and we stayed in the restaurant for a long time, just talking. And he was with his brother, and the cool thing is like they're asking me questions about law enforcement. Like they have a genuine care and want to know how can we get better? How can we do things better? And so like most people wouldn't even care. So he actually cares. So while we're there, there's a Dallas police officer who's working as security for the restaurant, and so. I'm the only officer sitting at this table with Dak and his friends and everything like that. And so I'm trying to make a point about certain things, how we do in law enforcement. So I call over the officer. I'm like, hey, sir, like, you mind coming over here? Like, can you tell them, like, can you basically affirm what I'm telling them? And he's like, yeah. So we start talking. So this officer ends up sitting down, Jaime
Castro, he's our DPA president.
Yep,
good friend
exactly.
of mine. He's actually going to come on the show.
Oh, that's awesome. So Jaime sits down with us, and he starts talking. We're in this restaurant. It's like 1:00 in the morning. And we end up sitting at this table for like 2 or 3 hours. Jaime's just like, having a conversation with us. So it doesn't just stop there. Jaime goes on, and now he's on the foundation of Dak's nonprofit organization. So he's not just talking about the work. He's actually out doing the work, getting to know the guys, going out with the chiefs of police and stuff. Like, he doesn't have to do none of that. Like, he doesn't have to do zero. So,
no,
he didn't pay me to say that, by the way.
God, he's just so genuine. I know about his struggles that he's had himself with mental health, and just the added pressure and added anxiety and all the negative stuff that gets thrown on that guy, being the quarterback QB1 of the biggest franchise in all sports. Yep. All sports. And that kind of is going to go into my next little realm here, is when it comes to mental health in the first responder community. I started in '97, and I know how it was then, and we've come a long way when it comes to officers seeing counselor, even talking about it. Mm-hmm. How was it? How was it whenever you started to what it is now?
So when I started, there really wasn't a lot of attention paid towards mental health. It was like they talked about it in the academy. It was like a module in the academy where they
check
talked
off the
about,
box.
Yeah, exactly. But it wasn't like a big thing. And then over the years, it's starting to evolve a lot more, because I think you have a lot of good leaders in law enforcement that are starting to recognize the damage that happens to officers over the course of a career. And so now, like looking back to where we're at, I mean, we're light years ahead of where we used to be. I mean, I remember getting involved in a critical incident when I first got started, and it was just like, all right, you good? Like, yep, I'm good. All right, cool. On to the next. And then now my department, you know, the moment you are out, right after you're done with that critical incident, they bring you in, talk to some counselors. I don't even care if you don't want to talk to counselors. You're going to talk to them. And then checking up on people, making sure everybody's solid. So I think that mental health has come a long way. I still think we can go a lot further. I think we haven't even scratched the surface. And the reason I know we haven't scratched the surface is because when we start to see the death by suicide start to drop, then we know we are scratching the surface. It's the number one killer for police officers. But I think we're trending in the right direction. And I think the thing that's so awesome about it is, you know, law enforcement can really set the tone for so many other industries. Think about it. Like, law enforcement is one of the only industries where we're exposed to, I don't know how many critical incidents throughout a career.
Well, there's a Dr. T, Heather Todell, shout out Dr. T. She's actually the Dallas Cowboys. She's on
Psychologist?
She's on their psychologist,
Wow.
but she's also one of our Assist the Officer Foundation counselors. She's culturally competent in this community. She comes from a family of law enforcement.
Wow.
And she's specialized now. They're up there at the Frisco Star. That's
Wow.
where she's based. But she says I love what she said is that the police profession is like a bad human experiment. You set an individual down for 10, 20, 30 years in some case, and you expose them to bad image, bad experiences, bad trauma, and then you expect them you release them in the wild and you expect them to be normal.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense.
No, you can't. It's not possible.
So imagine if we could start to scratch the surface and start to improve this in law enforcement. Imagine what law enforcement could do for other professions.
Yeah, because if you have a better cop and better sound body, mind, and soul, and you're putting them out there to deal with a community, you're going to have a better product.
But not only that, like we will be able to essentially be the mavericks to helping other people navigate mental health. If we can fix it,
Yeah.
then I
absolutely.
can tell you there's hope for everybody. Because I'm like, man, we're some of the worst. Like, think about that. We are some of the worst. Absent of military vets, and arguably it might be more difficult for officers and military vets because there's not a lot of military vets that are actually experiencing active combat right now. Officers are experiencing critical incidents on a daily basis.
And it's not just a critical incident. It's the when we talked about this before on the show, is the amount of emotion you're exposed to.
It's like a roller coaster.
It is a roller coaster, and then you go home, and who's affected at home when you're trying to come down from that crappy day and that high and that low from that day? Your family.
Absolutely.
And then it ruins families. That's why the divorce rate in this profession is so high.
70%.
It ruins families. And if you ruin a family, you ruin home life, and work life's wrecked. That's why I really believe that's why suicide is so high percentage wise in this profession. You know, I heard somebody the other day, we're the only animal that kills themselves. And it's just, think about all the pressure that we put on ourselves, the exterior pressure from social media, from the community, and then we break down mentally because of all this.
Wow. Never thought about that.
No, I didn't either until I heard that. It was fascinating.
Animal doing that.
Yeah, exactly.
I got a question I got to get out before we get too much further. How can people support Breaking Barriers United?
Man, just follow us, man. Follow us. All those platforms, Breaking Barriers United on everything. Just follow us, man. Like, our journey, it's crazy, man. I always tell people, man, I feel like my life is a movie. Like, it's not real. The opportunities I get, the place I get to travel, like this week alone. So I'm here, Dallas today, and then I'll leave tomorrow, and then Sunday I go to Albany, New York, and I speak on Monday. Then I'm back in Dallas with you guys again next Wednesday through Friday, and then I come back, and then I'm going back to New Jersey. It's insane. So the best way you can support me is follow me, and then if you ever want me or somebody from our organization to come and help bridge the gap at your organization or your school or your company, you need to get through conflict, whatever it is, man, please reach out to us. You can email us at info@breakingbarriersunited.com. Again, that's info@breakingbarriersunited.com. I'll have somebody from our team get back to you, and we can definitely set up a time to come out and figure out how we can help you out.
I want to give a mention to the great Dr. Brianna Wall, your president.
Oh,
she's
yeah,
amazing.
She is. She's no joke.
Yeah.
We hired her about a year and a half ago. Between her and my wife, oh man, I got some of the best employees that I can even ask for.
You got some great pillars sitting there that are supporting all this.
You
and
better
gonna
shout
grow.
out your wife too.
You better shout it out.
Oh, my wife she is the backbone. I'm the employee. She's the boss. So she just basically puts stuff on my calendar. I just show up. She is. But my wife is amazing. Like, I can't even When people say they married up, like I legitimately married up. Not only does she look good, like my wife looks really good. Like we walk out in public, I see guys looking. I'm like, yeah,
I've seen pictures. Yeah,
my wife looks good. She looks good. So not only does she look good, but she's just amazing. Like she holds down the fort. I'm gone a lot, and I wouldn't be able to do what I do now unless she was able to support that. So we have 3 beautiful kids. We have a 10-year-old, a 7-year-old, and a 5-year-old. And when I'm not there, she's holding it down the fort. So shout out to my beautiful wife, Kimberly, because she is amazing.
That's a huge ask for 3 kids. Yeah. I did the same thing to my wife, and every time I leave town, I'm just like, I'm never going to be able to repay this.
I know. I feel terrible. I'm like, dang. And then, especially, it's even worse when you call home and you hear all the kids arguing in the background. And it's like, dang it. Like,
you're like, hey, you're breaking up. I got to go.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
I got a meeting to get to.
I'm struggling now. I'm grinding, babe. I promise you, I'm out here working. Meanwhile, I'm over here drinking.
This hotel's horrible.
Yeah.
Ryan, we've talked about a lot. I've heard you recently. I listened to your podcast and the Ryan Tillman podcast. I want everybody to listen to that, and they'll hear more about you and then your perspectives and your journey, and you're going to continue that. But one thing you talked about that really made me really stop and stay in the car and finish the podcast and the episode because I wanted to hear how it ended is you were talking about being in a culture and embracing mediocrity and having a victim mindset. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So being a black man, I'm just going to be blunt. Being a black man, like, there's a lot of things that culturally are kind of like, hey, everybody's against you. The white man is against you. The system is against you. And you're trained these things as you get older from just society in general. And I remember when I was a young age, my mom and dad always told me to learn my history, which I'm actually so grateful for because I think it's so important to know history. Because again, like I said earlier, history repeats itself. So, in learning my history, I always learned about the Martin Luther Kings. I always learned about the Rosa Parkses and Harriet Tubmans, which was awesome. But one of the people that I didn't realize or I didn't learn a lot about was Booker T. Washington. And I encourage everybody, not just black people, but everybody to go onto YouTube and listen to the autobiography of Booker T. Washington. It is life-changing. The reason it's life-changing is because Booker T. Washington was a slave. He was born into slavery. His mom was black. His dad was actually white, so he's mixed. But he was still treated as a slave. And he talks about in the biography, like, what the conditions were like, the clothes and all this other stuff. But what Booker T. Washington possessed, which was so evident throughout his biography, is he possesses that is something that is a requirement for society, which most of us or a lot of people don't have, which is compassion and mercy. And throughout that, he had compassion and mercy even for the slave owners who were having him and kept him in slavery. He talks about how when there was a civil war going on and some of the slave owners would come back, the slaves would actually go into the home and actually try to help them recover. And they weren't trying to help them recover from their injuries because they were forced to. There was a level of endearment and like they cared about them. Like there was they actually had a relationship with each other. And so fast forward, he just talks about like, they finally, the Emancipation of Proclamation is passed. They find out that they're no longer slaves. He goes all these miles and miles away to go to get an education. He's turned away. Matter of fact, when he arrives at the place where he's going to stay overnight until he continues his journey, he goes into the hotel thinking like, everything is all kosher. And the hotel owner says, hey, look, no, you can't stay here. You got to go. So he goes and sleeps on a sidewalk in the freezing cold in the winter. And he's like, all right, well, it is what it is. And so, but in his mind, he was so fixated on getting to his destination to get that education. He makes it all the way to the college where in his mind, he's like, I heard there's an opportunity. They said I have an opportunity here. And they say, no, you can't go to school. You can't get your education. So the normal person would have said, oh man, I traveled all these ways. Oh, well, I'm giving up. He says, all right, no problem. And so along his journey, he had met a lady who he's living in her house and she's like teaching him how to like, clean everything, make it spotless and all this other stuff. And so he learns all these traits about just being tidy. So he starts to tidy up the classroom and all this other stuff. And after he gets a job at the school, he does such a phenomenal job that they're like, man, like, we're going to give you an opportunity to go to school and get an education here. So like, I say all these little things about his story because at the end of it, he basically comes to this epiphany. He's like, look, man, like, I could be mad at the man. I could be mad at the system. I could be mad at white people. I was enslaved and all this other stuff. But yet I learned so many different traits that have allowed me to actually go out there and be and better myself and better my community. Not only did it help me, but I'm actually more skilled than the actual white oppressors that oppressed me, because I was the one that was actually doing the work. So he's like, man, if I go out there and teach our community how to build and how to be entrepreneurs and have this entrepreneurial spirit, like imagine what we can do. So then he shares his story in his speech, and he talks about the speech, and this is what's awesome. There's a ship that's coming in on this river. And as the ship is coming in on this river, there is, they're getting ready to they're getting ready to what's the word for it? They're dehydrated. Everybody on the ship is dehydrated. So everybody on this ship is dehydrated. The captain sends out a distress signal to another ship that's in the same harbor. And the distress signal says, please help. We need help. We need water. So then the other ship, the captain of the other ship says, cast your bucket right where you're at. And so the captain on the distressed ship is like, no, like we need help. Like we are thirsty. We are about to die. We need help. So they send the distress signals again. The captain on the other ship says, cast your bucket right where you're at. So then the other ship, the captain of the ship is getting frustrated. He's like, man, like what's going on? Like, why is this happening? He's like, man, we need help. We need water. And the captain says one final time, he says, cast your bucket right where you're at. So finally, the distressed captain, he tells his sailors, he says, cast the bucket where we're at. They lower the buckets into the water, and they pull up fresh water. And the moral of the story is like sometimes we're looking for all these people to help us out. Sometimes we're looking for handouts, but sometimes you just need to cast your bucket right where you're at, because the problems that are the solutions that you're seeking to the problems that you have are probably right where you're at. And man, like that to me as a black man was like, I don't want to embrace this mentality of being a victim. I'm not saying that, our ancestors haven't been oppressed. I'm not saying that there's not racist people that exist. I'm not saying that there's ignorant people that exist, but I'm not going to allow them to prevent me from going where I know I can go. We live in the greatest country in the world, the United States of America, and we have ancestors that fought tooth and nail so that way I can live in the freedoms that we have today. So I want to cast my bucket right where I'm at, and that's what I want Breaking Barriers United to be, and that's where I want our community and society to go as a whole, is like, stop letting the man or the politicians, these people hold you or tell you what you should be. You go out there and be the person that you were designed to be.
Hey brother, hey sister, I'll never give up on you. Hey Mrs., hey mister, I'll see this all the way through. No matter how far the sun and the moon, I'll never give up on you. Down when you're lonely, and I'll pull you up. Life leaves you heavy when the going gets tough. I'll be your shoulder, together we'll run. Up from the bottom, yeah, we'll rise above. Hey brother, hey sister, I'll never give up on you. Hey Mrs., hey mister, I'll see this all the way through. No matter how far sun and the moon, I'll never give up on you. I'll never give up on you. Brother, hey sister, I'll never give up on you. Hey Mrs., hey mister, I'll see this all the way through. No matter how far, for the gold and the blue, I will never give up on